Let's give him a hand as he comes on up.
Hey, everybody. Thank you all for coming out on your Thursday night and watching our silly tall tale. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Nice. Just to remind everyone and those who are watching, my name is Dennis Baker, the Business Program Director. A big reason we do these is not only to learn the behind-the-scenes process of these films, but to encourage you to create your own work by listening to people who've been there, done it, and survived to tell about it. So we have our special guest. I'll have you introduce yourself officially.
I'm Drew. I go by Drew. Friends call me Drew, so if you've watched my movie, we're friends now. But Anderson Boyd, writer, director. I also, real quick, want to thank, pleasantly surprised me, Dan, the DP, is here. See any more?
Give him a hand, yeah.
There? Yeah, so welcome.
Nice. Well, thanks. It takes an army and a village, so welcome to your a crew member that's here. We're going to jump into it. It starts with story and script because you can't make a movie without that. So talk a little bit about how the story came to be, your writing process, stuff like that.
Sure. So the seedling really was, excuse me, this gentleman in Rome was actually fountain diving the Trevi Fountain. I think I read this a long time ago. I started writing it at 25, which was, I think, 2011. So years before that, even, I read this little snippet, and not sure how it panned out. Whether I'm sure it stopped at some point, but he was getting away with it. I think local law enforcement was just that crazy bill, letting it happen at the time or something. But didn't really think a fully formed story could come out of it. Years later, late one night, it just popped into my head. Got out in the living room and probably freaked my girlfriend out. Started scribbling. Wrote about 10 pages or so. Let's see. Yeah, 2011. It took about a year and a half to write the script because it was in spurts. I was in post-production pretty heavily at the time, and I was, I think, on a graveyard shift on an Adult Swim show, so I had to write during the day and get my hours when I could. Took a while, but yeah, and I think more thematically, it was like a reaction to maybe some listless feelings of my 20s, trying to reconcile the pursuit of a passion with financial stability, which very hard in the film industry, obviously. So, as well, I think it was, I was watching a lot of old golden era Hollywood films like Capra films and Sturgis films. Really so saccharine, your teeth hurt, I like to say. And wanted to model something that off of that, because I realized that you're never promised a second film, so if I only got one chance, I really wanted to make it just an absurd, breezy, kind of blithe, tall tale. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that process of writing. Was it just you in front of a computer when you had a couple of hours? When did you start kind of maybe getting feedback on that writing, if you did?
Yeah, so it was stolen hours when I could, just me in front of the computer. I would also structure ahead of time. You know, I think there's a lot of virtue to what people say. Well, if I know where it's going, the audience would know where it's going too. I respect that entirely. But for me, I really have to kind of diagram it out. Did get feedback as it got closer and more fully formed. Would share it with confidants and friends, people whose opinion I really trusted, and see what's really working. And there was a lot of license with that because it's an inherently really absurd story, so try to push that full throttle. A lot of feedback. I think feedback's very important in writing and in the editing phase. Editing especially is an extension of writing. It's important to really cull all the opinions you can.
And then where in the process were you like, okay, I'm at a place where maybe I can start pre-production, having those kind of bigger conversations? When was that happening for you?
Yeah, after I got a break in the post-production, the days kind of freed up a bit. The rewriting happened pretty quickly. I went through 4 or 5 more drafts and showed it. I purposely didn't show it to who became my producer. I wanted him to read it, for the first time, what I felt was the closest approximation to what it would be. So I shared it with him. He really responded to it. He comes from the same school of thought and appreciation for a certain type of film that he loved it, and we really hit the ground running there. We started budgeting it, started scheduling it, doing storyboards in the off hours. This is before any of the money had been set up, but yeah, he was the first person brought on, and that was where the script kind of turned into development.
Well, give him a little shout out. And how do you guys know each other? Kind of how did that friendship build and working relationship build?
Sure. His name is Juan Pochat. He's the man, one of my favorite people. He's a really hard worker. He's got a mature patience that, is integral to producing. Argentinian-based filmmaker. Met him in New York. He was the producer on the first feature I cut, which he hired me blindly. Really established a great rapport. So I knew when I would get the chance to maybe do my own feature, he was the guy to talk to, because I saw him just attacking it every day on that one. So he was the first person brought on board as producer.
And then from there, how'd you build out your other department heads? How'd you start talking to other people, getting them on board, convincing them to, probably work for zero money or very little?
Yeah. An acquaintance of mine was putting together a feature film shot in the mountains of North Carolina, and I was renting out my camera package, actually, and also I got offered a little bit part in that. A lot of fun. It was a great, great movie. I think if you asked Dan, that's where I met Dan, actually, they might say I shouldn't quit my day job, and I would concur. But went down there. They were shooting for 3-4 weeks and inclement weather and all this kind of stuff. I got the sunny days. I lucked out somehow. But met Dan, really liked him just right off the bat. And met Katie, who was our production designer, Katie Bulla. And from there, they kind of recommended more crew, met a lot of them there. And essentially, 80 or 90% of our crew was UNCSA grads, which is the school down in Winston-Salem, which produces a lot of talented people. And we kind of filled it all in with them, basically by their references, which was fantastic. Yeah.
Talk a little bit process of raising money. Where did that come from? Yeah.
This was equity financed by an angel investor after establishing years of trust and kind of showing a track record of some successes in my 20s. But really coming prepared, it was the fact that Juan and I had budgeted it, which of course changes, and scheduled it, which of course changes, and storyboarded it, really established a confidence that, hey, we could handle the business side of it as much as the creative side of it. But the real green light was the NC Film Incentive, which was 25% rebate, which has now reached its sunset date. But that was the real kicker. We went down and talked to the film commission, realized we would be eligible for it, essentially, with the way we had it mapped out. And yeah, we were one of the last productions, I think, to qualify for it. But that was the real big green light.
And you were doing all of this pre-production planning in New York to plan to shoot in North Carolina. Talk a little bit about that process of not having your locations local, or kind of like that kind of.
Very, very difficult. In fact, we didn't have a locations department, which is ill-advised, certainly. With a film with 60 or so locations and 29 shooting days, it's haphazard. But we did pay everybody on the crew, which was something we were quite happy with, because it can be exploitative as a young person in the film industry. But to that, we had to make some concessions and cut out entire departments, essentially. But while in New York, yeah, we were remotely just kind of targeting places and people and things we wanted to encounter once we got down. We came down a couple months. We only had 2 weeks of pre-production, but we came down, Juan and I think, August maybe, when we started real pre-production in earnest in September. So we were going out scouting and stuff, and everybody on the crew came up with ideas for fill certain holes with locations and such. But it was kind of difficult to do it remotely. Luckily, I'm from there originally, Raleigh. Been in New York for about 7 years, but I had an idea of places we could target and stuff, so we made a short list.
Nice. And that was August, September of what year?
2013. It's been a long, long time. Yeah, we wrapped November of 2013, and then, yeah, long process from there till here, I guess.
Let's talk a little bit about casting for our actors in the audience. Did you write with anybody in mind, or did you just write and then did the casting process afterwards?
So this was a fully formed script that we brought to our casting director by virtue of luck, really. We had somebody put us in touch with Tracy Kilpatrick, who is way out of our league, way out of our league, but she was willing to work with young producers. She liked the script. She thought it was really cute, and fun, and opposite of cynical. So she was like, "Yeah, I'll go out on a limb." And she, kind of another instance, it was 90% or so local actors. She was like, we'll populate this with a lot of really good local talent. So we would get taped auditions in New York, and she really kind of got it, and it was a very easy process, but we would whittle it down to our core group, and then we went down there and met her in her living room, had a beer, and the most informal casting session ever. It was just meet everybody and kind of ultimately sign off. So yeah, no, I did not write with anybody in mind, but I do think that's can be fortuitous. You know, I think a lot of actors would respond to that if somebody came to them with material and said, "Wrote this for you." They may scrutinize it in a different manner, a little more thoroughly, or just be flattered by it. Also, I think it can give some vitality to your writing if you're writing somebody whose voice you've known for years just as an audience member. You can pop that script a little bit. Haven't done that yet. I'd like to in the future, but not on this one.
And then talk a little bit about the other side of the table. What came into the room? What did actors do that was helpful or help make a decision for you? To talk about your decision process in casting, because sometimes it's not 1 + 1 = 2. So
Certainly. Yeah, well, you know, this was the first time I really went through the full casting process. I'd done short films before, but that was even more informal. I think it's really beneficial, and this may be self-evident, but to go with your gut, you know, even if your idea of internalizing this character or interpreting this scene seems radical to you, and you may be like, well, maybe I should approximate what they like. I think go with your gut, because it's great to be surprised, you know. Sometimes the best things come when you see it just through an entirely different lens than you ever could have imagined, just because they had a different read on it. So go with your gut, certainly. And yeah, I mean, we're in the business of rejection, essentially. I would never let rejection get anyone down, because even if somebody's not right for the part, it always goes into the mental Rolodex, like, I love that person, but this is not the right opportunity, maybe down the road. So yeah, just let your confidence guide you and follow your intuition.
Thanks. Talk a little bit, you mentioned it, but get a little bit more into production. Remind us how many days. Talk a little bit about the locations you did use. Where were they around for the people who are maybe will be watching from North Carolina or who are from North Carolina? Where was the talk a little bit about how well that worked out, favors, that type of stuff.
Sure. Yeah, we were 29 days. 29 days, I think about 65 locations. We had 6-day work weeks, which were grueling.
I just have to mention rare for an indie film. Like that's a huge feat.
Yeah, it was a marathon, to say the least, especially without that locations department. But we relied on the goodwill of a great many people. You know, there's not a lot of film in Raleigh. Wilmington used to be still to a degree, good film town, but you know, you go towards the Piedmont and it's not so much. So it's kind of a rarity and kind of a treat for people that something's shooting there. And if you just approach them with a very, you know, kindness and humility and say, here's what it is, it's kind of going to be a circus, but if you want to help us out, we'd be greatly appreciated. And by and large, I think almost everybody was willing to stick their necks out for us and let us use locations, many locations. I think the majority were unpaid and just people were just excited about the project. Of course, we did pay for several. Our hero set was paid for, a rented house and such. Yeah, I think people really get excited about the process, the mystique of movie making, so they'll extend a lot of goodwill.
Since we've seen the final product, maybe tell us some behind the scenes stories or anecdotes about certain scenes that our audience saw. Dog stopped barking for 5 minutes to make this thing. Did it stop raining for 5 seconds to make this shot? Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Let's see what I can think of. Well, the gas station, all the gas station scenes where the two Miles and Jack encountered Durwood, those were all shot in the same day. We had 7 pages we had to do in one day, which was just very scary, very intense. And you can't control the road. We couldn't control the roads. You know, a lot of honking, a lot of a lot of burn takes that way. We pulled it off, and I think we're all really happy with how it happened, but we were fighting light at the end. So nothing particularly unique or astounding about that day. It sticks out in my mind, though, because it's just controlled chaos, you know. And sometimes, though, you get lucky, and when you need the skies to part, they do, and you just really get lucky. Some funny ones, maybe. I think it's a very small insert shot, but at the end where Miles is thumbing it and his car's broken down just for a quick, brief moment, the car actually ran out of gas, so we were just like, what the hell, let's shoot a little something, see where we can shoehorn it in. Another one, here's a good lesson. There's a shoehorn shot at the end, and this is totally on me, the whole like kind of explanation of Penelope's, what she did. All the way through, I was like, we don't really need to know. I kind of liked it better that way. As we got towards, we got a sales agent, we got a lot of offers for distributors, which we ended up not doing, and we self-released this. But a common thread was, it's kind of an unresolved story thread, and I like those sometimes in the right circumstances, but I kind of capitulated and shot this insert shot, which I think was a mistake, ultimately. So, yeah, there's all kinds of context for shots all over, so some are, yeah.
Talk a little bit about how did or maybe did not in pre-production, production set yourself up for post-production.
Sure. Anything you can do to cut the fat, and yeah, I would say knowing our workflow, we knew how it was going to go. Essentially, we knew what nonlinear editor we were going to use, the process, going to color. We knew we were going to do the online ourselves to save a lot of time, just so we could pass over a file to the colorist, cut up a cost there in half, essentially. Things you can do, like, this is highly technical, but get a sync box for camera and audio. And when you do that, it takes your sync, so when you put it in your nonlinear editor, it's just smashed together, and you can essentially get ready to cut. We cut this in Final Cut 10, which is kind of a controversial program. I don't know how much you guys know about editing, but it blew my mind. I'm so happy I did. There's a suite of things that accompany it that you can do to take script notes if you do it the right way. We didn't do this, but you can basically, the day you sit down to start editing, everything is done. The weeks that an assistant editor, we didn't have an assistant editor, so the weeks or months that an assistant editor may be prepping things, you can do just almost instantaneously these days. All that technical morass to say, plan your workflow. A lot of times on indie features, you know, it's just like a goal of let's just shoot it all, get it in the can, then we'll figure it out from there. That can really bite you, because you know post-production is expensive, and if you plan ahead of time like that in those really highly technical things, you can save yourself a lot if you take the onus on yourself. Yeah.
I don't have it in my notes, but I believe you edited the film, right? Or was it? Did you have it? Yeah. Okay. So I want to ask you, as an editor, is it easy for yourself to separate the kind of the director mentality and get into editor mentality, or is that something that you're kind of going back and forth and it's?
Yeah, it was a great learning experience. I think now, if I get another chance to do a similar pairing, it would be much easier. And I knew it. You know, I anticipated it going in. I've got to separate like what was for lunch that day on set. When I'm looking at this footage, there should be a good partition between those. But if you're especially brutal and you remind yourself to be especially brutal, I don't think it's a problem. I think you can maintain perspective. Yeah, but it was a little bit of a learning curve. I've cut my own stuff before, but never at this level, never with as much professionally shot footage. So it was a curve, a learning curve.
Talk a little bit about film festivals. Some directors just want to get it out to anybody. Some people are very targeted about certain films based on your style of film and locations. Talk about kind of your philosophy in submitting to film festivals.
Sure. We applied, so festivals come in essentially 4 tiers, 1, 2, 3, 4, of course. And I think you should always apply to the big four, Sundance, South by Southwest, Tribeca, LA Film Festival. We knew there was virtually no chance this was going to get into any of them, but you should always try, because you never know. Some days somebody might just pick up on it and be in especially good mood or vibe. But to that end, we focused our efforts on Tier 2 and Tier 3 festivals, which is where we thought we'd have the most success. And, there's a lot of festivals that are genre-based, or you can tell that your film might be better suited there. We didn't really have a particular strategy, except for ones we were familiar with. Ones at the time we had a sales agent on board who would recommend it for these different ones, and they were lobbying at different festivals. So yeah, by and large, the festivals we got into were Tier 2. I would say it can get away from you and be really expensive. So target it as best you can. I don't know if there's a method to the madness, but you got to find your own, because otherwise if you just blanket it, that can be a mistake. I've made that mistake before.
Talk a little bit about then, you just mentioned the distribution process. It's available now, so talk a little bit about how people can access it and share it with their friends, or tell people about how to access it.
If you liked it, or if you hated it too, you can find it on iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, Vudu. Netflix just bought a 2-year license for it, so if you don't want to buy it, you can wait till July 1st. It'll be on Netflix. Distribution is another tricky beast, like the film festivals. There are, more films being made than ever. It's alternately great, and it's like alternately stupefying, I think. I think getting a sales agent was good. We ultimately, again, didn't go with a distributor, but we garnered several offers. Just realized they weren't quite right. I think minimum guarantees, which are the advances, these days have kind of bottomed out because distributors are taking on so many films, and they only go after films they like, essentially, but they take on a whole lot and kind of throw them at the wall and see what sticks. Can be the problem, and this is like the middle level distributor that would be looking at this film. I'm not talking about the larger ones, but you spend 4 years on this thing. Don't give up control immediately. Maintain a bit of autonomy if you can, because it's your work and it's your passion. And it can be a gamble one way or the other, but be very discerning with where you let it get away from you, or who you give it to, essentially.
What's next projects you're working on? Talk a little bit about what's next for you.
Sure. About halfway through, I think my wheelhouse is more darker drama, if it may seem strange. I was writing a really sprawling, dark, international crime drama before Well Wishes, and I was neither equipped for it at the time or fully committed to it, which is a bad combination. But revisiting it now, I'm really into it and back at writing it again. And halfway through that, I think, or a little less than halfway through, I committed to Well Wishes and just let that shelve. But always writing. I think generating your own material is the most foolproof protection in this industry. So even if it's an unproduced screenplay or something, it always prepares you for the next thing. I think that's, if I wanted to give any advice, it'd be generate your own material for sure.
Great. We always kind of end with a golden nugget question. So as a writer and director, if they didn't remember anything else you talked about, what would be one thing you would want them to leave them with, or a couple of things you're like, if you could only remember this, remember this?
Sure. Definitely, again, generate your own material. Always just be creating something. You're in a creative trade, whatever it may be. I think it's very important to keep refining. I think cross-pollination is another one. If you want to be a director, learn how to edit. You will learn how to reverse engineer a story that way. It's very important. If you want to edit, learn how to write. Writing and editing are the same. Editing is just a very technical extension of writing. It's first cut of the edit is the final draft of the screenplay kind of thing. Everything. So if you want to lens, learn everything else. Learn design, full-on mise-en-scène in every way. Just learn a little bit of everything, and I think you'll make yourself available for improvement and for good things to happen. And yeah, just go after it full force. It kind of starts over here. I'm back to the ground floor, so I'm right there taking my own advice. You got to do it again. You got to start over. I don't want to. Yeah, if you can imagine doing anything else, I'm sure you've heard this before, and not feel complete terror, leaving like a career in film. Probably go do that, as it'll be more comfortable, less stress, more enjoyable life. But if that strikes fear into your core, I'd go at it full throttle, because it's worth it. I think it's a rewarding industry.
Thank you for sharing your work and coming out here for the East Coast. Let's give Drew a hand.
This was a treat. Thank you guys for coming and watching this. This is a big turnout.
Thank you for everyone coming. Do leave those surveys at the table. Drew will be around to say hi, and have a wonderful evening. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah.